Hello, I'm Mrs H. Today we're going to be sewing the Super Nova Satchel. This comes in two sizes, large and small. They're both very spacious. It's an ultra secure bag. This is an advanced level bag, so if you're a beginner, just watch the video, take your time, and you'll be absolutely able to do this. I'll show you the features of them. So I'll pop my small one down there. You're going to see how to sew that one now. So each bag has got this sort of baguette shape to it, shall we say. There's a large pocket on the front, so wide pocket. I've divided mine into two, and I've left the back one completely open, so you can slot whatever you want into there. And the small one exactly the same. I've divided the front one into two and left the back one open. You can divide it into 3, 4, however many compartments that you like. The handles use hidden strap connectors here, so hidden handles, so they feed in through the bag and then they're secured top and bottom by rivets. That's a great skill to learn, and you can transfer that to any pattern that you like. The bottom has got a solid base and some bag feet, and the base curves up around the outside of the bag. So if you live somewhere where you're likely to get a slushy winter, or it's maybe a little bit wet, you don't need to worry, because the bottom of your bag and the bottom of the sides of your bag are protected by that layer. So if you want to make it out of something waterproof like vinyl or faux leather or cork, that's going to protect you and your contents. So the pink on this one is the exterior fabric, and then the floral is the contrast. So on this bag I've used contrast for my handle connectors, my handle tabs, and on this one I've used the pink faux for my handle tabs. You can swap it up, you can use however you like. The handles are two-tone, so I've got the contrast on one side and the faux on the other, the main fabric on the other. And you can add a bit of fleece to these, fusible fleece to these, if your fabric is a little bit lighter weight and you want a little bit of bulk on your handle, you can add that. The pattern comes with two different handle lengths. So the short handles are 22 inches and the long handles are 28 inches. And you can use whichever handle length you like on whichever bag. Okay, so make your bag to suit your needs. I'll pop the large one down there and I'll show you. So this bag, I said it was ultra secure. So you've got the pockets on the front there and you've got this gorgeous shape on the side. But the best part about this bag is the very super secure top zip. Nobody's going to be able to get your wallet or your pass or anything out of your bag without you noticing. So the top, as you'll notice, it closes with two magnetic snaps. So you've got the magnetic snaps for extra security, but it also closes with this diagonal zip. So there is no way that the contents of your bag is going to fall out with your zip and your magnetic snaps done up. That is an ultra secure bag, but it doesn't look it, does it? It doesn't look like a functional utility bag. It looks gorgeous, it looks like a handbag. But it's an ultra practical bag. Inside, through the diagonal top zip, it's quite spacious in there, as you can see. There's a zip pocket, and the zip pocket, I've used a contrast colour zip, but I've also used contrast fabric inside the zip pocket, and the pattern tells you how to do that. So my lining fabric is this purpley colour, and then I've used contrast fabric inside. So the pattern instructions will tell you how to do that. The zip tapes are completely hidden. There's no zip tapes on the back of there at all. And then underneath the zip pocket is a slip pocket, and this is quite a nice wide slip pocket. It's not quite as wide as these full width ones, but it is quite nice and wide, and you can divide that however you like. And then on the other panel there is another full width slip pocket, so exactly the same as you've got on the outside, you've got on the inside, and you can divide that how you wish. This one I've left big because then I can put my Kindle in there or my tablet. I can just pop that in there and grab it out. as I said, the base is solid, it's nice and secure, so no matter what you carry in there, no matter what weight of things, that base is not going to sag. It's quite a big bag to not have a nice solid base, so we're just using some plastic bag base in there and some feet to give that a nice shape. So I hope you enjoy making this bag. I know that it's going to be massively practical, and well, if you love somebody enough to make them a handmade bag, I know this will go down a treat. So if you want to get your materials ready, and then we'll sew together. Right, so let's get started on the lining. We're going to make the lining pockets first. So we need our short zip, our number 3 zip, and a zip pocket facing, zip pocket bottom, zip pocket top, and a main panel. Let's have a look for my main panels. There they are. Got everything nicely labelled, but of course not in the right order, because that would be too easy, wouldn't it? Right, so I'm going to put one of these main panels back in. I only need one for the moment for the zip pocket. And if you're new around here, you don't need to adjust your screen. We're not in grayscale. I just like grey. So I've got my main panel there, zip pocket bottom, zip pocket top, and my facing. So my this is my lining fabric. So my main panel's out of my lining fabric. My zip pocket bottom and my facing are out of the same lining fabric, and my zip pocket top is out of my this is my contrast fabric. Okay, so we'll pop those two to the side for the minute. All we need at the moment is our main panel and our zip pocket facing. What we're going to do, we're going to draw a line on the back of this zip pocket facing. Okay, I'll turn that over, you might be able to see a bit better. Let me go a bit closer so that you can see. Okay, so this is our zip pocket facing. We're going to draw a box on the back of this, and then we're going to attach this to our main panel. So you'll need a you can use a chalk marker or a pencil, heat erasable pen. No, you can't use a heat erasable pen, sorry, because you're going to iron it later and that will make it stick. I'm going to use a biro so that you can see, not a biro, sorry, that's a trademark. I'm going to use a ballpoint pen so that you can see it quite easily on my fabric. But do be aware that this can bleed through. So if you're using a pen on the back of your fabric, make sure it's a dark fabric that you can't see. It doesn't matter if mine bleeds. It's more important for you to be able to see it. So I'm going to draw a line that's 1 inch in from each short end. So I'm just using my ruler to measure 1 inch in. And I'm going to do the same on the other end. And then using my ruler again, I'm going to measure a 1/2 inch in from the long edges. And this is going to create a box, a rectangle box. And this is fine for a number 3 zip. So a number 3 zip means that the teeth, when it's zipped up, when it's done up, are 3 millimeters wide. If you've got a larger zip, a number 5, you would just need to make this box 1/2 inch instead of 3/8 of an inch. So you can see that my box here that I've drawn, this actually measures 3/8 of an inch. So if you're using a number 5 zip, a bigger zip, you would need to make this zip, this box slightly bigger. I'm going to draw a line down the centre. This is where we're going to snip later to turn it through. There's nothing new on this zip pocket facing. This is something that we've done before in previous patterns. So if you're a Mrs. H fan, you'll have seen this before. And because I didn't follow the pattern, I'm just going to mark my centres now. If you followed the pattern, you did this before we even started. And you could give yourself a little gold star. Okay. Now I'm going to mark my centres actually on both ends of the main panel, because I'm going to need those centre marks later when I put the base on. Right, now we are going to measure down, and these facings, I'm making a small bag, but for the large and the small, this goes 2 inches down, and that seems a long way. And I understand that, especially for the small, it seems like it's quite far down on your main panel, but that's because the lining for this one is quite a capacious lining, shall we say. So when you turn it through and you're looking in your bag, it's a bit hard to see if it's a bit higher. So we've put it 2 inches down from the top. That's what's that, 5 centimeters for those who use metric. I'm going to pin at each end just to hold this in place, really. And then I'm going to sew around the box here. Now I like to start sewing in this top corner, so it's top for me, I'll turn it around for you. So I like to start sewing here, and then any back stitching is kind of not noticeable. And then later on when I'm doing the top stitching to add the zip, I start down there so that it's offset and not noticeable. So I'm just sewing this on a regular stitch length, nothing particularly special, but I'm sewing directly on my lines that I've marked, the outside box there that I've marked. And I'm going to start with my needle down so that when I get to the corners I can stop with my needle down, pivot, lift my foot and pivot, and then keep sewing. Pivot, put my foot back down again, and then keep sewing. Now when you get to this corner, if it's too far for one stitch to go, decrease your stitch length slightly and just do tiny little stitches just to get you to that corner, and then you can be really exact with your measurements. So I lifted my foot, I left my needle down, lifted my foot, pivot and put my foot back down again, and I can start sewing again now. We go. Right, we've sewn around that entire box. Now we're going to snip through the centre on these lines. Just trim my threads. Hang on, sewn through my thread there. Right, so now we are going to, I'm going to use my smaller scissors. And we don't want to snip through the stitching on the outside of the box, so we're just going to snip up to as close as we can. So I'm snipping through that centre line there. And then through these little triangles at the end. As close as I can get to the stitching without going through the actual stitching there. And the other end as well. Okay, and the other side, this is the last corner. Nothing like doing something like this in close up on camera. I'm making sure you get it right. Okay, so now we're going to press this, and I'm going to press it up. So on this side I'm going to press the facing up, and then the facing down, and then the facing over on each side before I push this through the main panel. I'll turn you back to the other view because we've come slightly closer in. Oh, my microphone's caught in my drawer, sorry. Because we've come slightly closer in on this view. Can't see my ironing board, so I'm going to have to move my block over. so that I can press on my cutting table. And I'm just using this is just my rivet setting block with a heat mat over the top. That's all it is. I don't want to, I have used this heat mat directly on my cutting mat before and it's warped my cutting mat, so I'm a little bit wary of that now. So I'm just going to press up and against the facing to get a really good neat seam line there. And then I'm going to push that down and press again. Good bit of steam on this step makes for a much neater zip pocket, I find. Right, so I've done the top and the bottom. I'm going to do the side edges now. Careful not to scorch your fingers. Turn it round, do the other side. Okay, so before we even push this through, we've already set into place those stitches and that seam line. So now we can push that through to the other side, and it should hopefully sit a little bit neater then when we do this final press. Sometimes it's worth taking a little bit more time just to do some of these things. Some things it's not worth it, and I'll tell you just to you know, you don't need to worry too much, but this one is a little bit more time, a little bit more effort, but it's definitely worth it. Right, so just manipulate the facing through to the back there, so it's sitting as flat as you can get it, just using your hands. And then we're going to press on these long box edges first. Make sure that those are sitting in place before we do the corners and the short edges. Okay, that's lovely and neat. So I've done that top, and that top edge of the facing is sitting very flat now, which is lovely, sitting in place. So we'll do this bottom edge as well, and then we can do the sides edges. Now I find that usually with zip pockets you're inevitably going to get some little puckers in these corners, but if you press from this right side, the main panel, you'll find that those puckers are hidden inside on your facing. So if you want to, you can go back and just do a little press on the facing side as well. Okay, so that's our zip pocket facing and our box opening ready. So we can pop that to one side for now. We're going to sew the actual zip pocket that goes inside. Let me put this over to one side. Alright, so now we need our number 3 zip, our zip pocket bottom and our zip pocket top. And I'm going to turn to the instructions for this one. And even though I do this every time, I just think, oh gosh, I hope I don't tell you the wrong thing, so I just like to have the instructions in front of me. So again, we should mark our centres. Put my little labels to the side there. Labels are included in the pattern on the last page. I like to include labels for you. So I'm just going to mark my centres. Now there are instructions in the pattern if you've got directional fabric. So if you have got fabric that's got an obvious top and an obvious bottom, then follow those. If, like me, yours is fairly, I'd say that's multi-way, then you don't need to worry too much about it. Right, so first of all, we're going to use the zip pocket bottom. So that's the same fabric that matches your lining. Okay, so zip pocket top is the contrast. So zip pocket bottom, and let me transfer that centre mark to the right side. So what we're going to do first is add a line of double-sided basting tape to the top edge. I've just started a new roll, so it's a bit giant, but that's okay. So just the entire length of that on the zip pocket bottom. And then we're going to add our zip. So the zip pocket bottom is right sides up. That's my interfacing on the back. You've added the double-sided tape, and then add your zip also right sides facing up. So on your zip, I'm just going to mark the centre of mine. So I can be sure that it's all nicely lined up. And I'm going to line up that centre with the centre mark there on my fabric. So you're lining up the raw edges and just pressing that into place with your fingers. Turn your back to the close view. So you've got your zip pocket bottom, and then along the top you've put your zip right sides up. And we're going to sew through these 2 layers using a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance, okay? So I'm just using my regular stitch length and my walking foot, because I'm too lazy to change my foot unless I really have to. And I've back stitched at the start and the end. Now what we're going to do with this is we're going to turn this so that the zip is on the wrong side of the fabric, and we're going to press that into place. Now make sure you're not pulling it super tight, because that will expose a little bit of the double-sided tape. Just push it back enough so that you know it's definitely out of the teeth, the zip teeth, and you can just press that into place. Let's see if I can put my little ironing block here on my cutting table, and then we can see what we're doing without having to move it all the time. This is a slightly different setup to what I usually have, so just experimenting to see if it works okay. Yeah, I reckon I can have that there. That'll be fine, won't it? So we'll give this a little press. So I like to press on the fabric side, and just make sure that your fabric is rolled back enough to be away from the teeth, but not so far that it exposes the zip, the double-sided tape. And we're not going to top stitch this at the moment, so don't panic. We're literally just attaching the fabric, and then when we stitch it into place on the zip pocket, that's when it gets top stitched. Well, I suppose sort of top stitched. Right. Okay. So we've got our zip right sides up and fabric wrong sides up, and then on the other side we've got our fabric right sides up and our zip wrong sides up. That's how it's supposed to be. Now you need your zip pocket top, and this is the slightly longer piece. Transfer my markings. Now if you've got a top edge, then follow the instructions in the pattern. So it says right, so if you've got a top edge and a bottom edge, pretend this is my top edge here, turn it to face you, this is my top edge here. You're going to add the double-sided tape to this top edge. So I'll do it facing you, so when you're watching this back, remember that this is facing you. Okay, so I'm adding some tape to the top edge as you see it. And then we're going to turn that so that this top edge is now on the bottom. Okay, and then we're going to put this panel on top like so. So that for you, the top edge of the zip pocket top is at the bottom. You lay the zip on top, again right sides up, the zip always right sides up, with the zip pull to your right. Let me double check that. Yes. Okay. So I'm doing this as though you are the one sewing it, although you've probably got brighter fabric than me. Right, so we're just going to line up the centres, matching again so that all the edges are matching. Line up the raw edge, and then we're going to stitch through this. Now obviously if you haven't got directional fabric, you can completely ignore all of that and just put it on whichever long edge you like. But we're going to do exactly the same, so we're going to stitch through using a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. Exactly the same as we did for the previous side. And then we're going to press these edges back, exactly the same as we did for the other side. So the right side of your zip is on the wrong side of your fabrics, and the wrong side of your zip is on the right side of your fabrics. That's right, okay? Except for you, it will be that way around, because this is a zip pocket top. The top is slightly longer than the bottom. So let's give that a quick little press. And again, we're not folding it back so far that the double-sided tape is exposed, just enough to keep it out of the zip teeth. There we go. Okay, good steam press goes a long way, doesn't it, in bag making, I think. Right, so now we've got our zip panel and our main panel. So now we're going to turn that over, and we're going to add some double-sided tape to the top and bottom of these box edges. So on either side of the box opening. Just going to add some tape just along the very edge there, and the top as well. Now the reason we add the tape to the facing and not the zip is because if you added it to the zip, there's a chance that it would show through the gap once you've sewn it into place. Right. So now we will add our panel on the back. So remember, the contrast fabric is at the top, and you can do it from the wrong side like this and just line up the edges, or you can get it sort of into place and then turn it right sides over, discover you've got it completely in the wrong place, and do it from this side. So I'm just pulling this back to make sure that the edges are lined up on my facing and my zip pocket panels, and then just make sure that's nice and even either side of the zip teeth. I open my zip slightly and then press that into place. Now double check where the stopper is on your zip. Okay, so you'll need to remember that for later. For the minute though, what we're going to do is we're going to sew around the outside of this box opening. Our zip pocket is open flat, contrast is on the top, and the zip pull is showing in this opening here. So I'm going to start at this bottom corner there, so that it's not so noticeable. And this exactly the same as we did before. So use your regular stitch length, and when you get to the corner, if you need to go maybe a couple of tiny stitches, change your stitch length down and do that. But when you get to the corner, leave your needle down, lift your presser foot, pivot, and then press a foot back down and keep going. Right, so once that's stitched into place, open your zip pull to at least halfway. Oh, I've got some glue or something on my... It's a bit sticky. There we go. Okay. So open it at least halfway. And then what we're going to do, on the back of the panel, we're going to bring this zip pocket top down to meet the zip pocket bottom. And we're going to sew around the 3 edges, but we're going to leave a gap in this bottom edge. Now the small bag is just too tight to turn the whole bag through on the pocket. You might be able to manage it with the large one, but the small one definitely not. So this turning gap is purely to close the turning gap in the main lining. So if you prefer to hand sew, you might want to not leave that gap open, but I like to machine sew, so I'm going to leave this gap open. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start sewing at the top, back stitch, so using my regular stitch length. So start at the top, back stitch, so all the way down to here, back stitch again, increase my stitch length to my longest stitch length, sew across the bottom, go back to my regular stitch length and back stitch, and then up the side to the end and back stitch again. So you have back stitch in here and here and here and here, with regular stitching down the sides, and then longest stitch length along the bottom. And then we're going to press that basting stitches between there and unpick them, so that when we go to turn it through later and close that gap, the seam allowances fold under really nicely. Right, so now I remember my stopper was somewhere near the edge, so usually what I do is I fold this back and I sew like this on the zip panels, but on this occasion I'm going to have it this side up and fold it back so that I can just check where my stopper is, and I'm going to draw a little line exactly over my stopper so that I don't break a needle on it. Okay, so I'm going to sew from this side down and around, not going over the metal stopper that I've just marked. That's my basting stitch. Go back down to my regular stitch. And I like to do a bit more back stitching over the open end of the zip, just to make sure that that end is nice and secure. Right, so we can take these pins out, and you can press these basting stitches. Now I like to leave them in until we actually need them, because I think it just stabilises the panel slightly more. But I will steam press them, help them shrink a little bit more. Kind of helps them to set into the seam then, I think. Not shrink, set. Okey doke. Alright, so that's our zip pocket done. And if you haven't already opened the zip, do open the zip. Now we're going to pin this up out of the way so that it doesn't get in the way when we do our slip pocket. And this is the small slip pocket we're going to do next. So we need our small slip pocket, and I've done mine out of contrast fabric. What's that? There it is. The instructions do say to use contrast, but some people prefer to use a line-in fabric pocket onto lining. That's okay, whatever you prefer. So now, because this is a square, we can literally just fold it in half and sew around it. But as we did for the zip pocket, I'm going to leave a turning gap in the bottom to turn the pocket through. So I'm pinning in the corners, and I'll pin at the sides and try to remember to leave a turning gap. I'm going to baste across it as we did for the zip pocket, and then it should, the edges should fold nicely at the end. So I'm going to stitch from here. So again, I'm going to have back stitching at the top, regular stitch length, back stitch here, and then basting across the bottom. And let me check the seam allowance for this one actually. 1/4 inch seam allowance, this one. So now I'm going to snip the corners and turn this through. Let me steam press these stitches first. Just make sure they're nicely set into the seam. Right, and I'm going to do a double clip. So on these corners I'm cutting straight across, but I'm also cutting even further into the seam allowance as well. Okay, and then into the seam allowance here, and straight across, and into the seam allowance, and into the seam allowance there. Into my corners. Now I'm just going to add a little dab of fray check on each of these corners to make sure that this stitching doesn't come unravelled when I poke it through, because I'm a little bit heavy-handed and I do seem to have the habit of poking through corners. So just to be sure, and I need my turning tool. I just use a crochet hook actually. Oh, I need to take those stitches out, basting stitches, so we're just going to unpick those. And then we can turn our pocket through the right side and turn the corners out. Hate unpicking, but in this case it does give you a better finish, so it's worth doing on this occasion. And if you suggest that you've only got your seam ripper out for a technique such as this, then there's no doubt when your friends or your family see your seam ripper out about making mistakes, because why would we make mistakes? Saying that, you've all seen all of my mistakes, so I don't know why I'm trying to hide it. Right, so now we can turn this through to the right side and push those corners out. Just take a minute to do this and make sure that these seams are fully pressed out on each side. Give you a nice neat square pocket, well, rectangle. And I like to run my crochet hook down the side seams just to make sure that those seams are fully turned out. And we give that a press, so we'll see which side we think is the neatest. I think that's the neatest side, or the squarest side. And I'm going to press from the top and into the sides, but not do the bottom just yet. Okay, so once you're happy with that, then turn these seam allowances under along that line of dots from where we pulled the stitches out. And they should fold fairly easily and neatly along that line of stitch holes. And if you make sure that your seams or your edges are nicely together, and then give it a little press, then you should get a nice neat finish there. Again, a bit of steam helps. It's always good to have a bit of extra steam, isn't it? And then we're going to top stitch along this folded edge, just to make it nice and neat, really. And now we can pop this onto our main panel. So this is going on the main panel that's got the zip pocket attached. So we've pulled our zip pocket up out of the way, marked my centre on that, so we can make sure that this pocket is centred. And this pocket is going, let's see, sorry, I've lost my place now. Right. There's so many measurements in this one little paragraph. Right, we're placing this 3/4 of an inch from the bottom and lining up the centres. Just make sure you've got your ruler nice and level with the bottom of your panel. And then we can centre that. Okay. Now if you're making the large, there is the option to add an extra slip pocket onto the wide pocket. And I'll point that out to you once we get there, because for the small one you've only got space really for the one. You could do the two, I guess, if you wanted. So now we're going to sew down the side, along the bottom and back up the side, and that's going to close this turning gap along the bottom. Now I like to backstitch at the tops of my pockets, and I like to backstitch a good couple of times to make very sure that it's definitely not going anywhere. And then you can divide this however you like. So there's a couple of measurements on here of how you might like to divide it. So once you've sewn this into place, you can mark at 1.5 inches from the left edge, that's 3.8 centimetres, and then the centre, and that will give you a little pen slot and a couple of smaller pockets. If you'd prefer to go directly in half, you can, or if you prefer to do 4 small, it'd be very small, but you can do that however you like. So for now I'm just going to sew this onto the panel. Make sure that your zip pocket's definitely out of the way there. Now I'm going to divide it how the pattern tells you to. Very good girl. Always follow my own instructions. Oh dear. Right. So 1.5 inches from the left edge, and for this one I'm not going to use my biro because that won't be so good. I'm going to use a chalk marker for this one. And also the centre. So when you're lining this up, make sure the lines on your ruler match up with the bottom of your pocket, and then you know that you're going at a 90-degree angle up the pocket, not going too wonky. So for these two, what I like to do is I like to start at the bottom and do a little back stitch, sew up to the top, do a little back stitch, and then pivot and come back down the exact same line and back stitch again. So then you get back stitch at the top and the bottom and a double line of stitching in between, just to extra secure that. As I said before, I'm a bit heavy-handed. There we go. So that's both of our, well, sorry, that's our pockets divided, and you can unpin your zip pocket then. So you've got 3 pockets in this little slip pocket and your zip pocket there as well. Leave that zip open. It's very, very tempting, I know, to close it, but leave it open. Right, now we're going to do the wide pockets, which are super simple and quite nice to put on because they're quite big pockets. So we will need our wide pockets. Now, if you're making the large, don't forget to make your second slip pocket and just put it to one side. Okay. Oh, hang on, we need our lining base first. Right, so we don't need our side panels for the minute. We don't need our other main panel for the minute. Right, So now that we've got this panel with the zip pocket and the slip pocket attached, we're going to attach it to the base. So here's my lining base. And we're going to match edges, so just make sure that that's the right way round. If the edge doesn't match, then it's not the right way round and you need to turn it round. Okay, and we're going to match this bottom edge of the main panel to the base. Right, so you can match centres if your cutting is slightly wonky like mine. And we're just going to sew through this bottom edge of the main panel and the base. And we're using our regular 3/8 of an inch seam allowance here, I believe. Let me double check. Yeah. Right. Now this is the edge that we're leaving the turning gap on. So we're going to sew, we're going to back stitch at the start, sew for, let me take it out so you can see. So we're going to back stitch at the start, sew for 1.5 inches and then back stitch. Increase to our longest stitch length and sew along the bottom to create a turning gap. So each end we're going to have 1.5 inches of our regular stitch length with back stitching at the start and end of each section there, and then in between we've got our long stitch length. So maybe I should mark on here where 1.5 inches is so that I don't overshoot. Now this turning gap is not going to be huge, so if you're using particularly bulky fabrics, see how you can reduce the bulk a little bit more before you do the final sew. Right. Regular stitch length, we back stitch at the start and at each mark, and then in between leave the turning gap with the basting stitches over. What you might like to do is just give that seam a little press. And I'm going to make a note here to tell you that in the instructions. So if you already read in the instructions, you'll see that I've already done that and I've seemingly travelled back in time, which is great. Okay, so I'm just going to give that little seam a press. Okay, so what we've got now is our base and our lining panel. So we're already halfway there in the lining, aren't we? Right, so now we need our wide pockets. So we've got 3 of each. We've got 3 contrast and 3 lining. Now you can do these all in one go if you like. So what we're going to do is get 1 contrast and 1 lining, and we're literally just going to sew them together along the top edge. So if you've got fabric that's got a direction, make sure you're sewing together on the top edge. Mine, it doesn't matter. So we're just going to sew along the top edge, and I'm going to do all 3 in one go just to speed things up a little bit for you if you're watching. I'm sure you're busy people, got things to do. Okay, so we're going to back stitch at the start and the end, and we're just going to whiz along the top of these regular seam allowance, 3/8 of an inch. Yep, and back stitch at the start and the end. Right, now we can snip the threads holding these three together, turn them right sides out and give them a nice press along the top edge. And use my iron again for this. You can just open them up. Now if you think about it, your contrast is your main fabric, or is going to be the right side of the pockets. So I like to press them open and then turn them so that the right side, or the contrast, is on top, and give them another little press. You can repeat that for all three, and then we're going to top stitch along the top folded edge. Right, let's top stitch these. So we're just using 1/8 of an inch away from the top. Now if you're making the large bag, you're going to want one of these with a small slip pocket on. So put two of them to one side. If you're making the large, now is the time when you put that small slip pocket on top and stitch through all of these layers. You're going to be stitching through the contrast and the lining to stitch that small slip pocket on into place. We're making the small bag for now, so we just need the you know, the wide pocket as it is. Now we need the second lining main panel, which is in my project bag still. Okay. And again, mark the centre if you haven't already. I'm sure you have, because I'm sure you followed the pattern and did this when it was instructed, and like me. And if you've watched one of my videos before, you'll know that I never ever ever actually managed to do my centre markings when I should. Very bad. So now we're going to line this wide pocket up, so it should be exactly centered on your panel, and we're lining up the bottom raw edges, and we are just going to stitch this into place along the bottom and sides. You can baste this into place if you prefer, because it's not going to be seen at all. So to baste it, just increase your stitch length. We're sewing along the sides and the bottom, back up to the top there, and it's literally just to hold it in place while we sew the layers all together. Right, now's the time to think about what you're going to be putting in this pocket. So if you want to leave it as the full width, then you can. You know, if you're thinking you might take a book or a tablet or something, you can. If you're going to be taking, I don't know, another pen, because you've already got a pen slot in the small slip pocket, you can do 1.5 inches. Although because this going into the seam, I'd maybe do 2 inches in. You can divide it however you like. If you're going to be taking your phone, you can put your phone, I've got mine in a massive case at the moment, but you can put your phone in and see, where do I need to sew to make sure that I've got enough space for this. If you need to take medication with you, then you can sort of pop it in and just work out where exactly you need to make them dividing lines for what you want to carry. If you want to leave it full width, then do leave it full width. That's a great pocket for a book or a tablet or something like that. I think I'm going to, now let's see, what does the pattern say? It doesn't say that you need to divide that. So it's up to you. Oh, decisions. I think I'm going to divide mine down the centre today, actually. Just so that then I've created another 2 pockets. So I've got my zip pocket, my pen pocket, 2 slip pockets in the other panel, and then another 2 here. So that will be 6 pockets altogether. And we know I love a good pocket. So that will be, that will work out very well for me. Chalk liner. Oops. Because I don't want to use a pen and it be seen, chalk liner just comes out easily. So again, I'm going to sew from the bottom up to the top, back stitch, pivot, and sew back down to the bottom. Oh, I'm going to change my stitch length back down to the regular stitch length before I do though. So this panel is ready to sew onto the base. So retrieve your base with one panel attached, open it out again, and you're going to be sewing the bottom edge of this panel to the base. So your panels will look like this. So you've got your top edges here with the base in between. And again, match up the centres. Really this long edge should match anyway, if you cut out nice and accurately. We're using our regular stitch length, and we don't need to leave a turning gap in this one because we left it in the other one. So we could just whiz along here. Now again, if you would like to, you can steam press this seam. I think I'm going to. It just gives a nice neat finish to the seam, really. that out and give that little press. If you're using quite thick fabrics, you might want to press that seam allowance open. I'm just going to press it towards the base for me. Okay. Actually, I pressed that one, but I didn't press it towards the base, did I? So let's do that. Just for the sake of neatness, just to say that we've done it. Right, so this is where we are, and this is what we've got so far. Now I understand that my contrast doesn't quite match my lining, but it matches my exterior fabric quite nicely, so it looks a bit garish at the moment, but we'll just have to trust in the process. So we've got our base. This is going to be the bottom inside of the bag, and then on this side we've got a zip pocket with these small slip pockets attached, and then on this side we've got the full width slip pocket there. Now if you want to, and you love pockets, you could add another zip pocket in there, really, couldn't you? You could have 2 zip pockets inside your bag if you love pockets. And this is quite a capacious bag, really, so if you want extra pockets for extra organisation, then now is the time to think about, well, probably actually at the start was the time to think about it. But if you're not too far, you could put an extra zip pocket in there as it is. So we're going to put this to one side and we'll get started on the top zip panel, and then we'll be able to see our lining come together. Right, so to do the top zip, what we need is our number 5 zip. Now I'm using continuous zip, so I've cut mine 2 inches longer as the pattern specifies. We need our 2 pieces of interfacing, and I'll talk about these in a minute. We need our 2 pieces of fabric, so I've got one for my lining and one for my exterior. My exterior is the plain grey. And we also need our piece of fusible fleece. Okay, so the interfacing, if you've followed the instructions on the cutting out, you should have drawn your boxes. So when you draw your boxes, you have one glue side up and one not glue side up, or glue side down. And when you draw your boxes, they'll match then. So I've got one glue side up and one glue side down. When you put them both glue side up, then they will be pointing in opposite directions. So they should form a bit of a cross. If you were to layer them and you've got your glue side up on both of them, then they should cross over like so. Okay. Now we're not going to fuse these onto our fabric. We're going to stitch them on, turn them through, and then fuse them onto our fabric. Okay. Now you don't need the fusible fleece if you are using the if you're using something like faux leather or cork or vinyl or something like that. You can use it if you want to, but you don't need to. If you're using quilting cotton, then you will need to, just to give it a little bit of bulk. Right, so let's start on our lining fabric. So with your lining fabric right sides up, place one of your interfacing pieces glue side up on top. Okay. Now the dimensions for the large and the small are different. So the small is longer, the large is taller. Okay. Now what we're going to do is we are going to sew through both of these layers. So I've got my fabric right side up and my glue right sides up. We're going to sew around this box using a really small stitch length. So I'm going to use maybe, I don't know, stitch length number 2. Now you can draw your, yeah, let's do that. So I'll draw my inside line and my triangles before we sew. I'll just draw it down the centre. This is exactly the same as doing a zip pocket. Okay, so the box and the zip pocket is exactly the same. We're just doing it at bit of an angle, and we're using interfacing instead of a facing. Okay, now we're going to stitch around this box, so just make sure your interfacing's lined up nice and evenly, and you can pin this if you like. I think I will, so that I don't move it out of place accidentally. So as we did exactly the same for the zip box, the zip facing, when we get to the corners, we're going to stop with our needle down, lift the presser foot, pivot, put the presser foot down and keep sewing. So we're going to sew all the way around the outside of this box. I'm going to use a stitch length number 2, I think. Let's swap me back to the other view. Okay. So I'm going to start part way along. Okay. Right, so we've sewn that into place. Now we're going to snip through that centre line and turn it right sides out, or push it through, sorry. Get my scissors. Okay. So snip along that centre line to the triangle and then out into each point. As we did before, try not to snip through those stitches. Let's get it as close as you can without snipping through those stitches. Okay, and I'll move my little pressing block back over. I tidied it away, but we still need it, so I'll move it back. So these ones are for after. Now we are going to push this through this gap here, and then we're going to fuse it into place on the back. So by now, when you push it through, your glue side should be facing the wrong side of your fabric. Okay, so just manipulate that as best you can. Now on the right sides, choose which edge you're going to start with. Choose one edge of the zip box, the long edge, and line up the edge of the interfacing with the edge of the fabric on the outside. And then just use your fingers to finger roll that seam out along the box there. And do this in small sections, so don't panic too much about the rest of it. Just focus on doing the first little section and then the second little section. Okay, so just make sure that that interfacing is tucked under on the edges of the box. So I'm just going to fuse this one little section first, because I've got that in place and I'm happy with that. And now I'm going to do the other side, exactly the same place but the other side. So line up the edges and finger roll just to roll it between your fingers to make sure that that seam is nicely pushed out. You can use your turning tool for that as well if you want to. You can just run the edge of it along, the end of it along the edge there. Right, so the edge is nicely rolled out, so I'm just going to smooth it, make sure that my interfacing is nice and smooth underneath. It doesn't matter too much if it does wrinkle slightly on the interfacing, because you don't tend to notice it. But I've started with a lining, and you'll notice that because anything that we do here will be hidden inside the bag. So if you want a little practice, start with a lining first, and make sure you've sort of got the hang of it before you start on the exterior. Right, so now we'll do the ends, and just roll that to make sure that the interfacing is hidden underneath. Just do it in little sections. So I'll do the end of the long box there, and then I can do this end here, and I'll pull that corner out, and I'm just tugging the interface. I'm giving it a really good tug, gentle but really good. Make sure that that interfacing is as hidden as it can be. Okay. It doesn't really matter so much on the lining because it's not going to be seen, but on your exterior you definitely want that to be hidden as best you can. If you find it's not sitting under so much, just separate the layers and pull a little bit on the interfacing, and it will stretch it slightly. It will stretch it slightly out of shape, but it will help it sit under a bit neater. Don't be afraid of tearing it. It's not the end of the world if you do tear it. Okay, just one last little section to do, and then that is my lining panel done. And I'm going to do exactly the same for the exterior top zip panel. So you can see we're literally just creating two oddly shaped and slightly bigger zip box panels like we did on our lining. Okay, so there's my lining piece. And don't be afraid if it bows out slightly, we'll correct that once we put the zip in. But that's what we created. So that's my lining panel, and I'm going to do exactly the same for the exterior panel as well. So I'll put that to one side, and then we're going to put the two together and sandwich the zip in the middle. And I'm going to put my fusible fleece right here so that I don't forget to put it in. Now this one, again, glue side up. This one is a little bit harder to see because the box is on the other side for me, but it's clear enough. If you need to go over it again on this side, just to make sure that you can see that box really well, then do so. Do that now. Okay. Right, so I've sewn that. I forgot to draw my line in the middle, so I'm just going to draw my line in the middle. I'm going to snip through it and then turn it right sides out and press into place. Same as I did for the lining, exactly the same. Right, now we need to apply our fusible fleece. So what we're going to do is lay this panel with the zip box created on top of our fusible fleece. Line it up as best you can. My cutting's a little bit wonky. So if yours is too, that's completely normal. And then we're going to draw around the inside of this box opening. And this will indicate where we need to cut the box out of the fleece. Don't worry about being too accurate because we're going to cut slightly outside the line anyway. Okay, so I'm just using my chalk marker to do that. I'm going to put a little mark there and a little mark there, and that's going to remind me that that edge goes on that edge, just in case my box is slightly wonky, which it very well could be. And with the ruler, I'm gonna mark 1/4 of an inch outside the box, and that's where we're going to cut. So we're going to cut the box 1/4 of an inch bigger than the box. And if your box bows out slightly, just sort of try to even it up a bit as you're drawing this. Doesn't matter too much. Just to give the top a little bit of extra stability, a bit of extra bulk, a bit of extra sturdiness. Right, so now we're going to cut on the outside line, just to cut this box away. Oh, I could use my rotary cutter actually. That would be a lot easier, wouldn't it? I won't risk the ends, I'll do the ends with my scissors. Right, there we go. So now we can pop, so this is glue side up, and I need to make sure that my marks are level. And then centre the exterior, so make sure that's flat first, that's a good start. And then centre this panel over this panel, lining up the edges, and there should be, you can just feel a little gap underneath on each side of the box, and then we can fuse that into place. Now I'm going to use a tea towel over the top just in case, because my cutting is so wonky, I don't want to risk getting fusible fleece on my iron. So I'm just going to steam this into place. Because I'm using a tea towel, I'm just letting the steam sit for a little bit before moving it, because I know I'm not going to scorch it. If you can feel the steam heating up your hand, just gently blow that steam away. Right, let's have a little check, see how that is. Oh, it's touched my tea towel. Obviously wasn't very accurate with my cutting out, was I? Right, now that's a little bit bobbly from my tea towel. So I'm going to trim the edges, and then I'm going to press it again without the tea towel, and that will take away the imprint of my lines. So I'm just going to trim this excess fleece away. And then I can fuse again. It's only a little bit, and it's just where my cutting out is slightly wonky. And that's okay. Just a little bit on this edge I'll get with my scissors. This is not one of those patterns where you have to be super accurate, so don't panic too much if your cutting out is as wonky as mine. It will be fine. That's the excess fleece off, so I know we won't get anything stuck to the iron. So I can press this again now without the tea towel. We go. Right, so that's our exterior top zip panel, and we're gonna create the slits for the no, we're not. Let me just double check what we're doing next before I tell you the wrong thing. We are going to add the zip. Okay. Good job I checked, isn't it? So I've got my zip, and if you want to, you can just seal that end if you're using continuous zip. I'm just gonna back stitch over that a couple of times, make sure my pull doesn't come off. Can use a dab of glue as well if you want to. I'm just being very impatient. I don't want to wait for the glue to dry, so I'm back stitching instead. So now with our exterior panel, we're going to turn it over, so we're on the wrong side. We're going to add a dab of, no we're not, we're going to add double-sided tape, not a dab of. Add some double-sided tape to the outside of this box opening. So just think of this as a jolly big zip pocket, like you would have on the inside of your bag. That's all it is. It's nothing too scary, just a big zip pocket cut on the diagonal with a bigger opening. But apart from that, completely the same. Now, if you want to, and I do, just add a little bit of tape either end as well, just to be sure that it's holding into place while we work with it. And a little touch there. Right. Don't put your tape away because you're going to need it again in a second. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this tape to attach the zip to the exterior panel. And then on top of that, we're going to add the lining panel so that it's sandwiched in between. The zip will be sandwiched in between the exterior and the lining. Bit long-winded, isn't it, taking tape off? Okay, so make sure your zip pull is in between the gap and just centre that over the opening. What you might want to do then is turn it right sides out and just manipulate that into place to make sure that that's nice and even on both sides, and press down really lovely and well. Make sure that the tape adheres to the zip And as I said, if your zip box bows out slightly, this is where we're going to correct it. So just manipulate it into place so that it's nice and even on both sides of the zip teeth. It needs to come out slightly. Okay, so this is where you correct it. Now we're going to sew around the outside of our box. No, we're not. Ignore me. Ignore me. I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm getting too excited. It's nearly lunchtime. Now we're going to add some tape to this panel. We're going to do exactly the same. And then we're going to attach this. And then we can sew it. Can't sew it before we got the lining on, can we? That would be silly. Okay. So exactly the same. Add some tape onto the back. I'm not going to do the ends on this one because the zip is attached to that exterior panel, but if you'd like to, please do. Please do. Okay. So now we're going to lay this on top of this, or shall we? Actually, let's do that upside down and place this one on top, because then we can line it up a little bit better. So in theory, you should be able to line up your edges, and that should just very naturally fall exactly over the zip, covering the edges of the zip tape. And remember to press down well on that. So I'm just going to have a little feel along through the layers and make sure that my edges are mostly even, and they are. Okay, so now we're going to sew around the outside of the box. Now if you're feeling confident, then do it at the 1/8 of an inch. If you're not feeling confident, then what you can do is sew it at 1/8 of an inch and then sew again at 1/4 of an inch, and then that will make sure that you've caught all of these layers in here. So I'm going to start off at 1/8 of an inch and see how we go. Because this is going to be visible, I'm not going to back stitch. I'm going to leave my threads slightly long and pull them through. Right, I've sewn all the way around that, so I'm just going to check on the back to make sure that I've caught the edge of the lining in that stitching. If not, and you've got a little gap, then why don't you go around it again, but at 1/4 of an inch, so you've got a double layer of stitching, and then that will catch all the layers on the back. That's pretty good, actually. I'm quite impressed with that. I'll give myself a gold star. Okay. So now we're going to add the slits for the magnetic snaps. We're not actually going to insert the magnetic snaps until right near the end. If you've got a narrow foot, then you might want to insert the snaps now, and you can do that. But if you've got a chunky walking foot like mine, then we're just going to create the slits for the magnetic snaps and then insert them later so they don't get in the way when we're attaching our sides onto our panels. So you'll need one of the washers from your snaps. Now you need 2 magnetic snaps, so that's 4 halves, which was, I know you've got that because that was already in the instructions. Now we're going to measure 1 3/4 inches from each edge, so from the long edge and from the side edge, and that's where we're going to put the centre of our snap. I'm going to use a pencil for this one just in case I get it wrong. It's not quite so visible, so let me move my pressing board out of the way. It's a little bit bulky, isn't it? We don't really need it right now. Maybe I need a bigger table. Right, that's better. So we're going to measure 1 3/4 inches from each side. So it's 1 3/4 from there, 1 3/4 from there. No, that can't be right. 1¼ sorry, I was looking at the large measurements then, so the measurements are different for the large and the small. Right, 1¼ and 1¼ so I created a bit of a box on the corner there that's 1¼ inches on each side, and I'm going to pop a little dot, and that is where the center of my magnetic snap wants to go. Turn this around so that you can see. Okay, so my dot is in the center of magnetic snap, and I'm going to draw my slit marks. You could do it that way, I guess, but you're getting a little bit close to the stitching, so I've done mine sideways like that. I'm going to do exactly the same for all 4 edges, so 1¼ and 1¼ and a little dot. Okay, now we're going to cut the slits for it, so only through the exterior layer, so you lift it up and away from the lining, but we're just going to cut the slits for that magnetic snap. So you can either use your scissors or a seam ripper with something to stop you going too far, or a little craft knife, and I'm going to get my fray check out as well to remind me to use that. So I'm going to use my craft knife, and I'm going to fold these layers back so that I'm only cutting through the exterior, the interfacing that's attached to the exterior, and the fusible fleece. Remember, if you're using vinyl, you might not have the fusible fleece. Okay, so that's that one done. I'm going to fold this back, and I'm going to fold the zip back as well, so I'm not cutting through the zip. It's a little bit bulky on the zip end here, so just make sure that all the layers are out of the way. Okay, and we'll add a dab of fray check to that before we move any further. We're not actually going to insert the snaps now, so that gives it time to dry. Okay. Right, so we're ready to finish our lining now, which is an exciting thought, I know. I'll pop my snaps to one side for the minute and check I haven't forgotten anything in my instructions. Great. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we're going to attach the sides of the lining onto the zip top panel. Swap you back to the other view so you can see. So we're going to fold these edges of the exterior. Remember, my plain grey is the exterior. I'm going to fold these back and clip them into place, and we're going to try and forget that we've even got an exterior panel attached. Just going to try and fold these back. Okay. So if you can, try and ignore the exterior. The only panel we're interested in is the lining. So we'll need our lining panel that we created earlier. So we've got our base with our 2 main panels attached and pockets attached. And then we are going to match up. So make sure your zip pocket is down flat again. Your zip is open. And we're going to lay this panel on top, matching the long edges, like so. Okay, so you've got your main lining panel there, and you're attaching this long straight edge, and you can match centres. They should match anyway if you've cut out fairly accurately. So we're ignoring the exterior and just attaching the two layers of the lining together. So we're attaching the top of the lining main panel to the long straight edge of the lining top zip panel. So I'll pin this and then I'll show you what it looks like from the side. Okay, so ignore this exterior here. I've got my main panel underneath and my top zip panel on the top, and we're going to sew along that long straight edge. Just using a regular stitch length, regular seam allowance, back stitch at the start and the end. Now we can open this out and we can press the seam allowances towards the lining. So again, trying to ignore this exterior panel and just press to the side. I know you can't see what I'm doing. I'll just do this very quickly and just talk you through what I'm doing. You might need, let me unclip my exterior for a minute. I could just fold it back, can't I? So I'm just pressing these seam allowances here between the top zip panel and the main panel, press them towards the lining. And then we're going to sew the other side. So we're sort of creating a bit of a loop of a lining here. Okay. So on the inside, this is what you've got. You've got your main panel, base down here, main panel, and then top zip panel, which will come over like that once the bag is made. So now we need to attach this top of the lining main panel to the other straight edge of the top zip. So again, fold your exterior top back. This will become a lot clearer to you once you've actually got the fabric in front of you and you're manipulating it the same way that I am. But looking at it on the video, it's not, I can understand it's probably not that clear. So we're just matching that edge, and they should match. If not, just match up your centres. It doesn't matter too much. We can always trim them a little bit later. And again, sewing regular stitch length, regular seam allowance through that end there to attach the top zip to the lining main panel. Back stitch at the start and the end. Managed to sew through my zip. We'll ignore that, pretend that didn't happen. Okay. If we had bloopers, we could add it to the bloopers, couldn't we? Right, so now you've got a loop. So to press these, you'll need to use the end of an ironing board or something, and just lay it over and press those seam allowances towards the lining panel. And the end of my ironing board is all the way over here where you can't see it, but you know what I'm doing. So although you could actually lay your top zip panel flat at this point, because it's not going to harm it to have a little extra press, just as long as you get those seam allowances pressed nice and neat. It'll help your lining to sit a little bit neater. Okay, so now we've got our lining loop, and this is how it's going to look kind of inside out, the other way around. So we've got the exterior top zip attached, but apart from that it's all lining. And now we need to put these side panels on, because this is how your bag is going to it's how your bag's going to look at the end. So we need to put the side panels on, and we can do that now. So if you haven't already, then go back to your pattern piece for these main panels and mark on it where the top of each is. And that will help you make sure that you get them in the right direction. Now you need, for this, you need your centre marks. So I'll do that. And you need your centre marks for the side panels and for these panels. So I'm just going to mark centre mark on my side panels. And then I'll do the others, and I'll show you so that you know if you forgot to mark those on, you can do it now. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fold this in half, matching the seams together. So just match those two seams, and then that should naturally fall at a place where that's the centre, and you can add a little mark there. So you would probably want to use a chalk pen or something. Right, so I've done that bit. So I've done that side of the top zip panel on the lining. I need to do the same on the other side of the lining top zip panel. Just mark the centres there. And then also on the base. So fold those together, match those seams together, and draw your centre mark, and again. So you should have, on this loop, you should have 4 marks in total. 2 on the base and 2 on the top zip panel. Okay, so you should have a mark bottom and top of the of that side, and then also bottom and top on this side. So you've got a mark in the centre of your base, a mark in the centre of your top zip panel, a mark in the centre of your base, and a mark in the centre of your top zip panel. You've also marked the centres of your side panels. So we're going to put these right sides together. Again, ignore this exterior as much as you can. Pretend it's not there. And we're going to match this centre of the top zip panel here. So the centre there, we're going to match that to the centre of the top of the side panel. So match those marks and clip it or put a pin in, whichever you prefer. And then we're going to match the bottom of the side panel to the centre mark on the base. Okay, if this is confusing, hang on till I've pinned or clipped all of that into place, and then it should become a little bit clearer. So just work your way around, easing this side panel into place. So ease the lining loop, the loop of the lining, all the way round the edge of the side panel and clip it into place. Once I've done this, I'll show you, and it should make a little bit more sense. So we've got our top zip panel at the top here, and I've clipped into place this side panel. Now this is a very tight fitting side panel, so once you've done the majority of it, you will find that there is a little bit extra side panel that doesn't meet the lining loop. So this is where we just snip into the seam allowance slightly of the lining loop, and then we can ease that into place. So you should be able to just ease that around, and that should fit perfectly then. That just takes away the extra bagginess of a, you know, sometimes you get in bags like this. And the same on the other corner. And I'm doing this on my bottom corners actually. But you can do this clipping on the top. So just ease that around. Perfect. Okay. Right, so what we've got is the top zip panel with the exterior attached, the lining loop, and the lining loop is clipped onto this side panel. Now we're going to stitch around it, and we're going to stitch using our regular seam allowance because the lining loop is slightly shorter than the exterior loop. You can, well, let me tell you the two ways that you can do it. So you can do it with side panel down, and this is slightly more accurate for ensuring you don't get any puckers because you can control the lining loop a bit better by having the side panel down. This is slightly harder though. So if you're feeling a bit daunted right now, turn it upside down and have the lining loop on the bottom and the side panel on the top. And if you get a few puckers, you get a few puckers. It doesn't matter, it's only the lining, okay? So it's your choice which way up you sew it. And you can start either at the top or at the bottom, your choice. I'm gonna start at the top here because I've got a little gap in my clips. And I'm gonna sew with the side panel down. Okay, and we're gonna sew all the way around the entire thing. So back stitch at the start and the end, and keep going all the way till you get back to where you started. Regular stitch length, regular seam allowance, and I'll see you on the other side. Okay. Right, so that's one side in. Now I should have said that when we come to the exterior, we're going to be hand basting it into place before we sew. So if you are watching this before you actually make and you feel slightly daunted, please feel free to do that. Kind of hand baste it into place before you sew. Don't be afraid of it, just pull it into place however you need to, manipulate it into place. And then once you're happy with it, just give these corners of the seam allowance a little trim with some pinking shears, and this will help it curve around the corners then, or around the bends. You only really need to do the you know, the corners, but if you'd like to do all of it, you can. Okay. I should have checked inside really before I started trimming, but yeah, that's all fine. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to attach the second side panel into this loop. So again, ignoring the exterior, we're just going to attach the second side panel into there to create your lining bag. Okay, I'm going to take a little break, and when I come back, I'll have finished this. Okay, so by the time you come back, so pause me now if you want to, and put your second side into place, and then when we come back we'll get started on our exterior. Right, so I've sewn both of my side panels on, so my lining is complete. So that's the full lining done, and we've got this exterior top zip panel attached on there as well. So that's what we're going to attach the exterior to, but for now lining's complete, and that gives you an idea of the size of this bag and how spacious it is. Okay, so we can pop that to one side for now. If you want to just fold it in the middle, you can see sort of how your bag's going to look, which is quite nice. So we'll pop that to one side and we'll get started on our exterior. Let's put it over here, so we've got it there. We're going to need our handle facings, which is 4 pieces of interfacing, and our main panels, our exterior main panels. So that's these. Now what we're going to do to start with is we're going to draw a box. This bag is all about boxes and facings and things like that. So again, I'll use my pen so that you can see it on the video, but you know, use something that you won't see if you're using light fabric or you're worried it's going to bleed through, or you know, something like that. And we're going to draw a box, so same as we do, exactly same as we do for a zip box, a zip pocket box, but we're going to draw a box for the handle to go through, and we're going to make this box 3/4 of an inch from each long edge. So I'll line up my ruler on the edge of the interfacing and draw a line that's 3/4 of an inch. There. Well, that didn't come out. Might need a new pen. Swap to this chalk liner and try again. Pretend that didn't happen. So 3/4 of an inch from each long edge and 1.5 inches from each short edge. And that's going to give you a box that's just about an inch wide. Right, so, and you'll be able to see on the illustrations in the pattern, or on the photos in the pattern, that you should have a line in the centre and triangle each end on your one. Just so we can save time. I'm not going to do that on mine, but just know it's there. So now we need some double-sided tape. And on the side that doesn't have the glue, we put 2 of these to one side. We'll do one side at a time. So on the 2 that don't have glue, so my glue is right side down, I'm going to add a little pop of double-sided tape inside that box on each of these. And this is purely and simply to hold it in place while we sew it. Just placing that right in the middle of that box on the not glued side of the interfacing. Never know whether to call it the right side or the wrong side. So I've gone for unglued. Hopefully we all know what I mean. Right, so I've got 2 of those. Now we need a main panel, our exterior main panel. Just one will do for now. And let's mark the centres on here, which hopefully you already did when it instructed you to do so in the pattern. And we're going to place these facings glue side up. So this exterior is right sides up. I've got my interfacing on the back. And we're going to place this so the tape is down onto the right side. So we're going to place it glue side up. And we're going to place it, so in the small bag, it's 1.5 inches from the top and 1/2 inch from the centre. That's not 1.5, that's 1.5, there we go. And 1/2 inch from the centre. So that's edge to edge. So the inside edge of your facing here should be 1/2 inch away from the centre, and the top edge should be 1.5 inches. So I'll do that for the second one. Make sure I get it lined up nice and neat. take the backing off and then pop it on, so 1/2 inch from the centre. So there should be an inch between the two. Okay. Right, there we go. So just pressing those down. Now we're going to sew around each box, snip into them as we did before for the zip pocket and for the top zip panels. We're going to sew around these boxes, snip into them, turn them through and then fuse them into place. So I like to use a small stitch length just so that I can be sure that the stitches are burrowing right in there. Right, so we've sewn around both of those boxes. I'm going to snip through them. Let me use my little knife to get started because they're quite small, these holes, aren't they? Now you should have your box drawn on, so just imagine my box is drawn on there. So again, we snip into the corners, making sure we don't go through stitching. Okay, so I'll move these other ones out the way. You can do these both at the same time, or you can do it how I'm doing it, do one set and then do the other set. Right, so now we're going to feed it through the opening, roll the edges and then fuse these into place. So exactly the same as we did for the other box openings, for the top zip panel and for the zip pocket. So we're just pulling this interfacing through to the back, and if you pull it from the back side you can make sure that you get just a little peek of the exterior fabric there before you fuse it, and then you know that what's being seen from the right side isn't going to be the interfacing. As you pull this it will bow out slightly, but it's a very, very small box, so it should be okay. Just take it slow, each side. Doesn't matter if there's any wrinkles on this bit because nobody's going to see it. It's behind. You can press it from the right side then once it's fused into place. So I've got a nice neat gap there for my handle to go into. Nice neat handle opening. So I'll do the second one. And again pull it into place and fuse. Okay, so once those are both fused into place on the back, turn it through, turn it over to the right side, give them a nice press, make sure you've got a nice, lovely, neat panel on this side. Okay, so we've got our two handle openings there, look a little bit like eyes, don't they? This is where we have to draw a little smile on. Right, so we need to do the other panel. I'm just going to whiz through that quickly, and then we'll get on to actually using this and making the handles. So I'm going to do exactly the same as I did for that first panel with my facings and my second main panel. Right, so we've got both of our main panels with our handle holes, and we're going to need to make the handles now. So what you'll need is your handle tabs and your rectangle rings. So you should have 4 of each. And on these handle tabs, we're going to draw a line down the middle on the long edge. So these are 2 inches wide, so you need to draw a line at 1 inch. So use something that's not going to be seen, because it is going to be on the back of your fabric. So if you're using something that will bleed through, it will definitely show once you finish construction. Okay, now these are dead simple. All we're going to do is we're going to use our iron to fold the edges, fold these and press the edges into the centre, and then we're going to top stitch them into place. So just fold each long edge into that centre line that you've just drawn, and press into place. Ironing mat is a little bit bouncy, so let's unfold it. There we go. And then press the other end in, the other edge in as well. And if your fabric wants to ping back up again, you can always fold it or place it the other way so the folds are facing down, and then press from this side as well if you want. So we're going to do that for all 4 of these, and then we're going to stitch them all 4 and then put the rings on and put them into, base them together. It's like I'm trying to give you a sneak peek here, but you'll see it all anyway. I'm going to go through all of the steps with you. Now these kind of handle tabs are really good if you've got some fabric that's a little bit bulky, or you're making a bag, any kind of bag, and you need to do some connectors or some tabs, and your fabric's too bulky and you think my machine's not going to go through that. You can do these kind of tabs. You can modify any pattern to have these kind of tabs. So say you're putting a strap into the side seam, and you know for sure your machine is not going to handle the 4 layers of the strap and the layers of the exterior and the lining and all of that. You can modify it to add a tab on each side, these kind of tabs that I'm showing you now, and that will reduce the bulk of the handle down to only 2 layers rather than 4. Okay. Right, so I've pressed those into place, and now we're going to pop them through the machine, and I'm going to sew at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, 3mm away from the edge, and I'm sewing on the right side, so you can see that I've got my 2 edges folded in, and I'm going to sew on the bit that doesn't have the edges showing. So sew on that side. Make sure I turn my stitch length back up to normal. you can feed these through one after the other, straight through. And then when you get to the end, have a little snip there, and you can feed the first 3 back through again. So we're doing it down each edge. Let's do that last one. It's like I've got a little string of sausages, and you can separate them. Just, there's only 1 stitch in between each one, so you can just snip through. Just snip through. And then what we're going to do is we're going to pop these through the rectangle rings to the centre, and that disguises all of those raw edges. So you've got the raw edges folded into the centre and then sandwiched in the middle there. And when we baste, so we're going to baste these 2 raw edges into place. When we baste, we're just going to baste right at the very end. So we're not going to try and get as close to the ring as we can, like we might usually do, but in this case we're just basting the very end, because we're going to put some rivets through later on, so we don't want to risk catching the line of stitching when we put our rivets in. Right, so I'm literally just going to pop these through the machine right on the very end, so maybe 1/8 of an inch, 3mm away, purely and simply to hold the ends together while we're working with them. Right, so there's my handle tabs. Pop them to one side for the minute. I'm going to get going on the strap, or the handles. So you should have, now you should have cut out 2 exterior and 2 contrast, or 4 exterior, 4 contrasts, depending on whether you want double-sided handles or not, of whichever length that you wanted. So you could either go for the short handles or the long handles. And if you've got particularly thin fabric, or fabric that you think needs a little bit extra bulk, then there's also the cutting instructions to cut out a piece of fleece, 2 pieces of fleece, 1 inch wide, just to go in the centre of those. My fabric's quite nice and sturdy, so I'm not going to use the fleece, but I will tell you how to use that. Okay, so what we're going to do is, sorry, if you're using the fleece now, fuse it into the centre of 2 of your handle pieces. So if you're using, like I am, 2 exterior, 2 contrast, fuse it to both contrast or both exterior. Okay, so that you've got 1 piece of fleece in each handle, because one of these and one of these makes 1 handle, and one of these and one of these makes 1 handle. So they both look the same because I've got the interfacing right sides up. Okay, so that's 1 handle, and these 2 are 1 handle. Okay, great. Right, so we're going to sew 1 short end together using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. 1/4 inch. Let me double check. Yes, 1/4 inch. Don't forget to back stitch on this one. Okay. Oh, maybe I'll do the other one while I'm here. I'll do both together because we need 2 handles, don't we? Otherwise it will look a little bit lopsided, which might be quite fun actually. Maybe we should do a modification. Right, okay, so these are stitched together. So 1 contrast and 1 exterior stitched together, one exterior, one contrast stitched together. Now I'm going to press the seam open, okay, so we can reduce a bit of bulk. And I'm just referring to my notes or to the pattern so that I don't tell you anything wrong, because it has been known to happen before. So just to make sure that I don't tell you anything wrong, I'm keeping my notes here. Okay, so we'll just press the seam allowance open on that one and do the same on this one. And you can decide which fabric you want to show as your main handle fabric when you're carrying the bag or when you've put the bag down. So that's up to you. Now what we're going to do is we're going to draw a line down the centre of each handle. Obviously you'll have more space because you won't have a pressing block on your work surface. So I'll move that out of the way. And because I'm a little bit short on space, oh, do I have room for my long ruler? Maybe. Let's give it a go. So again, these are 2 inches, so we're going to draw a line 1 inch down, 1 inch from the side, and that's directly down the centre. If you've fused your fleece on, then draw over your fleece as well. So the entire length of your handle, both fabrics, and on both handles. So I'll do the other one. Fortunately, because we need to insert the handles at this stage of construction, you don't have to put up with me procrastinating on sewing my handles, because I'm not a fan of sewing handles and straps. Although actually once they're done it's very satisfying. So I'm trying to learn to like sewing handles and straps because they're really very practical. Right, there we go. Okay. Right, I can put my big ruler away now. So if you're using cotton like me, then what we do next is fold each edge into the centre and press into place like we did for the tabs. If you're using vinyl, you might want to omit that and just fold it into place as you're sewing, which you can do without too much hassle. I just think on cotton you get a nicer finish if you've pressed it into place first. So the entire length of this handle, I'm going to go along and fold each long edge into the centre to meet that line. And I'm going to do that in the entire length of the handle on both sides, and then I'm going to repeat it for the second handle. Well, that was boring, wasn't it? This is why I hate making straps and handles. Okay, so now we're going to take 2 of these handle tabs with the rings attached, and we're going to thread 2 onto each handle. Now if your rings have got a right side or a wrong side, make sure that they're right sides facing. Mine haven't, so I can just pop them on however I like. Pop those both on, and don't worry too much if they sort of twist around, because you can adjust them again afterwards. Okay, now making sure that your handle's not twisted, match up those 2 short raw edges. Okay, so you should have the loop of your handle with the rings attached or sort of threaded on. And then open out these short ends, and we're going to sew these 2 short ends together. And you can use your centre marks to line them up if you want. And with that, make sure that that's fully unfolded. We're going to sew that together. And let me double check what seam allowance we're using, 1/4 inch. And we'll do the same for the other one while we're here. Doesn't really matter whether you thread them on this way or on the right side, because you can always twist them round afterwards. Don't panic too much. As long as your loop of your handle is not twisted, then we're doing okay. Again, make sure that's fully unfolded. Right, so then what we're going to do is we're going to press open these seam allowances of that little seam that we've just sewn. So those short ends that we've just sewn together, we're just going to press those open. Obviously, if you're using faux or something that you can't press, then just finger press those, okay? And then refold these ends into the centre. Make it nice and neat. And give those a press. Okay, so we should have one continuous loop with our handle tabs and our rings on there. So we do the same for this one. Just give that little press open. And then we can refold and press that into place. Coming at it from the wrong angle there. Try this way. Very difficult to iron from the wrong direction, isn't it? And again, you can do it, you know, you can put your raw edges down and press from the right side if you like. Okay. So we've done that. Now, what we need to do is top stitch along the handle. So on the it's your choice whether you want to do it on the right side or the wrong side. If you're using cotton and you've pressed it into place, then I would recommend you do it on the right side. If you're using faux leather and you haven't been able to press it into place and you need to fold it as you sew, then I would recommend doing it on the wrong side. So you can see my picture in the pattern is from the wrong side because I was using faux leather and I was folding it into place as I was sewing. But for this one, I'm going to sew from the right side because I have managed to fold it into place and pressed it into place before I start sewing. So we're going to sew at 1/4 inch from the edge. Okay, so take note of that. It's different from our usual 1/8 inch, which we usually use for top stitching. But we're going to sew all the way around the entire loop of the handle at 1/4 inch, and then we're going to take it out and sew on the other side of the entire loop. Okay. I would recommend starting with your needle down, so that if you want to readjust your hands as you're sewing, you can do. And as you need to, as you come up to them, just move these rectangle rings out of the way. Right, so I've sewn around the entire loop on that edge. So now I'm going to turn it around, and actually I'm going to start from the other end so that my starts and stops are at different ends. And I'm going to sew again at 1/4 of an inch around the entire loop, but on the other edge. So we've got our lovely loop with our top stitching. Let's get my long threads off. Okay. Now to turn this into one handle, let me swap you back so you can see the whole thing. To turn this into one handle, we just need to flatten this out. So pull your ring so you've got a ring at each end, and this is probably about the time that you want to decide which is going to be your right side and which is going to be your wrong side. So for me, I think I'm going to have my patterned fabric as the right side, so that as I'm holding my bag you can see the pattern fabric, my contrast fabric. So make sure you've got a ring at each end, and that the seam of where you sewed each side together is directly underneath that ring. So it's directly there where the ring is, and you can flatten that down, ideally on a really flat surface, not with ironing mats and things in the way. And in theory, if you cut accurately and you sewed using the same seam allowance, that should also match right by the ring. So just clip the two layers together to form one handle. My very tiny clips that I'm using. Now we're going to sew a box on this handle using an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So we sewed before at 1/4 of an inch or 6mm, and now we're going to sew at an 1/8 of an inch or 3mm, and we're going to sew all the way along one long edge, along the bottom, back up the other long edge and across the bottom and back to where we started. So I like to start around about here-ish, because I find it's a little bit less noticeable, and I would recommend not back stitching at the start and the end. Literally just get going and see if you can sew directly over the original stitching. So make sure that both of your layers are perfectly lined up over each other. Again, start with your needle down and just sew at an 1/8 of an inch away. So as you're approaching this ring, think about the size of your foot, your presser foot, not your actual foot, and see how close you think you can go to that end, and then still be able to have enough space for your presser foot when you pivot. Now if you can't get very, very close, don't panic, because we can always add a rivet in there. We can always add a rivet this side of the strap on the main handle when we're finished, so don't panic. there we go. So we've got one absolutely beautiful handle. Trim that loose thread. With all of the raw edges fully enclosed, and it's double-sided. So if I'm going to have mine like that when I'm using my bag, and when I'm not using my bag, that will flip down and show the grey side. Let's see it on my bag. So my exterior is the grey and my handle will be the contrast. So when I'm using it, I'll have that lovely contrast showing, and then when I put my bag down, it will show that one. So if you want to use a completely different contrasting colour altogether, then that is also a great idea. Right, so now we've made our handles and we've made our main panels, so it's time to insert the handles into the main panels. There's no stabiliser on this yet at all, so don't panic. I haven't missed a step. Right, so first thing we're going to do, we're going to thread that through the opening that we made with the handle facing. Now the instructions tell you how far to put it through, but you should have 1 1/4 inches showing on this side. So just line up the edge of your ruler with the top edge that's nearest the ring, and make sure that's 1 1/4 inch, that's 3 centimeters. And then I'm going to use my chalk pen just to draw a line on there, and then I know that it's got to be that far through the gap to be in the right place. Okay, so you should in theory have on the back 1 5/8 of an inch visible. Now the pattern has you hold this in place and then pull this top layer back, add a dab of glue, and then push this down and stick it on, just to hold it in place until we rivet it in place later. But my fabric unfortunately shows the glue if I do that. It bleeds through. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to just hold that in place and turn it over and add a bit of duct tape to the back. Now if you've glued, I would recommend that you add a bit of duct tape as well, just to be sure that you're holding it in place securely while we're working with it, because it's not going to be fully secured for a couple of steps. So we just want to make sure that we're holding it in place and it doesn't shift around while we're working with it. So just going to add a couple of strips there. This won't be hidden at all, so you don't need to use pretty tape like me. Regular silver one would work. Okay, and then we do exactly the same on this side. Just make sure that your handle's not twisted. So both ends of one handle are going into one main panel, and it should be a nice snug fit. I'll measure again just to be sure I've got it in the right place. A little bit more. Before I tape this one, I'm just going to put it level and make sure that they're both even from what I can see. Yeah, great. It's all very well at measuring right, but if it looks wonky, that's no good. So if it looks wonky, even it up, and then it's better for it to look even than it measure even. Alright, so we'll just add a bit of tape to hold that as well. Okay, so when we secure these into place, we're going to secure them through all the layers, including the stabiliser. So that's why we haven't got any stabiliser on at the moment. What we need to do is grab our wide pockets. Do you remember the ones that we put aside earlier? Oh, I trapped my microphone in the drawer. And now we're going to lay these on the bottom, and you can line your centres up, but they should match on all edges if you've cut out pretty straight. And we're just going to baste around the sides and the bottom edges to hold them in place. We're not going to divide them just yet, so don't get too carried away and divide them. We'll do that later on. Just pin these in place, and I'm literally just going to whiz around the sides and the bottom using a basting stitch. But while I'm sewing, I'm going to be very, very careful of my handle, which is literally just taped into place because I don't want to risk pulling it out. So just make sure you haven't got anything around your sewing machine that's going to catch on. I'll swap angles. There we go. So literally just starting at the top, and we're sewing within the seam allowance. So seam allowance is 3/8 of an inch, 1 centimetre. So I'm going to sew now at 1/4 of an inch, or 0.6 centimetres. Lovely. Right, so that's attached to the main panel, and we're going to add our base next. So grab your exterior base piece, and again this has got no stabilizer on it at all, it's only got the interfacing at the moment, and we're going to match up the 11-inch edges. Well, it'll be 13 if you're making the large, but just match those up. If it doesn't match, then you've got it the wrong way round, turn it round. Okay, and we're going to sew through the bottom there, so on the bottom edges. I'm doing this backwards to me so that you can see how it looks like for you, but we're attaching the bottom edge of the main panel to the base. And make sure it's the bottom edge because you don't want your handles and your pocket to be upside down. So we're just going to sew through this. I'll just double check. I think it's the regular seam allowance. No, we're not. Rewind, rewind. Forgot to punch our holes for our feet. I'm going to put this main panel to one side for a minute while I do what I should do. Okay, so we need our bag base and we need our plastic bag base, which I've got on the side here. Okay, phew, lucky I realised that. So what we're going to do is we're going to punch 4 holes, and we're going to punch them through the plastic bag base and then through the exterior bag base. Okay, so mine are going to be, in fact they're the same for the large and the small. So it's 1/2 inch from each long edge. So I'll get my pen so that you can see where I'm marking these. And 1 3/4 inches. Got to be careful because I haven't got much space here. 1 3/4 inches, and literally all I'm doing is a little cross where those 2 lines intersect. So 1 3/4 inches from the short end and 1/2 inch from the long edge. Do the same, so I've got all 4. Oh, hang on, I'm doing the wrong bit. Doing the top one again. Okay, so I've got my 4 crosses on my bag base. Now I'm going to lay it on my, on my plastic bag base. I'm going to lay it on my exterior bag base. First I'm going to mark the centres. So on this one I'm going to mark the centres on all 4 sides, so that I can make sure the bag base, the plastic bag base, is fully centred on this panel. Right, so I've got centre marks on all 4 edges, and I'm going to divide this up as well. So what's that? Hang on, not very good at maths, I've got to work this out now. Plastic bag base, 9.5, so that'll be 4 3/4 from, yeah, right, wrong way, 4 3/4. No, it was the right way. Just mark the centre there, 4 3/4, 4 3/4. Just double check that is in the centre. Yeah, and 6.5, so that'll be 3 1/4 that way. Right, so I've got my centre marks on all 4 edges of both, and I can line these up then. So if you're feeling pretty confident, you can put both together like this and then punch the holes through both layers at once, or you can punch the holes through the plastic bag base first, lay it on top of the exterior, do a little mark through each hole, and then punch the holes. So it's your choice. I'm going to, oh, am I feeling brave? Don't know. I need a hammer. I think my hammer may have been redistributed to the beach gear. Bear with me. Right, found it. There you go. So I'll move my ironing mat off my... This is also my rivet board. Not only is it my ironing mat, it's also my rivet board. Turn it over to the other side. This is the side I use for rivets. So I think I am going to be brave, and I'll make sure that I've got it lined up in all 4 corners. So I'm making sure that my marks on all 4 edges are perfectly lined up. It's perfectly centered, and then just pop your punch directly over that cross that we've made. Give it a little whack. You know, I'm going to turn my microphone off for a minute so that you don't have the hammering. Hang on. Right, so as you saw, I hammered quite far into my board there to make sure that the holes are big enough, but I have got a matching set of holes on my base, my plastic bag base and my exterior base. Now I'm going to add a dab of fray check to the holes on the exterior, just to make sure that they don't stretch at all when we're using the bag. Okay. Now we can pop this plastic bag base to one side for later. We're going to insert that. That'll be one of the last things we do, very last things we do. Right, now we go back and we do what we should have done earlier, or what I was trying to do earlier. We'll pretend I didn't try and do it earlier. Now we're going to attach the base to the main panel. So just match up your long edges or match up your centres if your cutting is slightly wonky. Doesn't matter which way up you sew it. And we're going to sew along that bottom seam using our regular stitch length, and seam allowance will be just our regular seam allowance, 3/8 of an inch. Do you like to check before I tell you the wrong thing? Right, so make sure we're back down to our regular stitch length, and we're going to sew through all of these layers along the bottom. And then we're going to press this seam open and top stitch along it. So we're going to press the, sorry, not open, we're going to press the seam allowances towards the base. And then when we top stitch, we're going to top stitch on the base rather than on the main panel. Okay, because the base kind of comes up around the bag slightly, so you do see a little bit of the base. And I had one of my testers in mind when I did this, because they live in an area that's gets snow for a lot of the year, and they said that they only ever make a bag with a waterproof base, so something like faux leather or cork or vinyl or something like that. So I thought, well, how about on this bag I make sure that they've got that protection, so that when they put the bag down, it's not going to get in any slush or anything, you know, on the floor of a waiting room or anything. And also it will just protect the sides there as well. Right, so I've just pressed those seam allowances towards the base, and I'm going to top stitch on the base 1/8 of an inch away from the seam. Again, being careful of my handles so they don't fall out. So now we're going to do exactly the same, but for the other side, the other main panel. So I'll retrieve my second main panel that I did earlier, ta-da! And lay it right sides down on the base. So we'll have main panel, base, main panel. And I'm going to do exactly the same. I'm going to sew the seam and then press the seam allowances towards the base and then top stitch on the base. So we're basically just creating that same loop that we did for the lining, but with the exteriors. With the slight difference that we need to add some stabiliser as well. So. So now we'll press the seam allowances towards the base again. And then I'll top stitch on the base. Again, 1/8 of an inch away. So this is our main panel with our base attached. What we need to do now is attach the stabiliser. So I'm going to move this out of the way. Just make a little bit of space here. Move that out of the way. Just give us a little bit of space. So we've got our panel here. Let me double check. Yep, okay. So what we should have done earlier when you cut out and you applied your interfacing, which I'm sure you did, is fuse our Decaville light onto the foam. So this is centred on my foam. The Decaville is centred on my foam and fused into place. If you can see that. Let me try the other camera, see if you can see a little bit clearer. Okay. So now we can lay our panel on top of our stabiliser, and we're going to have the Decaville on top. So the Decaville will be sandwiched between the foam and the exterior fabric. And the reason I haven't fused the Decaville onto here is because through turning, etc., it might come slightly unglued or unstuck, and then it can go a little bit wrinkly. So at least if it's fused onto the foam, it's not going to wrinkle on your exterior fabric. And you can do that with any pattern that calls for something solid like Decaville or Peltex. Okay, so this should fit more or less perfectly-ish, approximately. So I'll start from the middles and I'll just smooth it out and pin as I go. And then we're going to baste this into place around all 4 edges, exactly the same as we do when you're applying foam to an individual piece. It's just that this way, when we rivet those handles into place, we'll be securing them through the foam to make them a little bit more sturdy, rather than having to cut holes through foam and feed handles through, and then you haven't quite got that stability of the foam and the Decaville. I'm just smoothing out as I go to make sure it's nice and taut across the stabiliser. And again, I'm just taking care of my handles. If they slip out, it's not the end of the world. You can slip them down back in between the layers, but it's just a little bit easier not to. Okay, so now I'm just going to start on one edge and sew all the way around all 4 sides, pivoting at the corners, using my basting stitch, which for me is a 6. It's a long basting stitch on this machine. So I'm just going to sew around all of it, and I'm going to sew within the seam allowance, so at 1/4 of an inch, or 6mm if you're in metric. Fab. So you can see, get a little idea of how your bag looks at this point. You can see how the contrast works. It's quite nice, isn't it? Okay. Right, let me put these pins away before I just like myself. Right. Okay, so next we are going to add our rivets. So this is how we're going to secure our handle. So we're going to add our rivets underneath each opening and on top of each opening, so it's secured in 2 places and it won't flop down and expose that hole that we've got. Okay, so the me get my rivet board back again, and then we'll measure, mark out. This is why I did the small one, because I know I'll be a little bit short on space. So large one, obviously if you've got a larger work area, or you're not filming, then it should be okay. Right, so we need to mark our holes, and I'll get my hole punch and my back out, and I'll get a pen. Where's my pen? There it is. Just make sure that I'm going in the right place. So we're going to punch the holes 3/8 of an inch below the handle and 3/4 of an inch above. So that's 1 centimetre and 2 centimetres. And because the handles are exactly, or the handle tabs are exactly an inch wide, you know that to centre those, you just need to go 1/2 inch in from the side to make sure that's nice and centred. So 3/8 of an inch. So line up the 3/8 of an inch mark on your ruler on that bottom line of the opening, that bottom fold, and then exactly 1/2 inch from each edge, I'm going to make a dot, and that is the handle hole, the rivet hole for the bottom one. Do the same on this side, and then 3/4 of an inch above. Stick with it that way round. So exactly the same, just lining up the 3/4 of an inch line on the bottom edge of that opening there, and exactly 1/2 inch from each side is the centre. If you prefer to, you could do a little paper template for this, and then just literally just lay it on top and draw your holes through. So I'm going to punch my holes through those 4 holes. I'll turn my microphone off so you don't hear the hammering, and then I'll come back. Right, we're going to add a dab of fray check to each of these holes, and then we're going to insert our rivets. I'm going to punch my next 4 holes while that fray check is drying, and then I'll grab my rivets and we'll set those. So I'll mark it again, same as we did before, 3/8 of an inch below. And 3/4 of an inch above. I'll turn my microphone off again so you don't hear the hammering. Right, we're ready to put our rivets on now. So you'll need 4 poster rivets and 4, no you won't, you'll need 8, sorry, you'll need 8 poster rivets and 8 caps. So I'll just pop this side in, and then I'll change camera view so you can see exactly what I'm doing. Now if you're a little bit nervous with rivets, or this is your first time, I've got a separate masterclass video on setting rivets with everything you need to know. So we'll link to that down below, and you can watch that while you're setting your rivets, just as a little bit of extra tutorial there for you. Right, so we've got our holes and we've got our fray check. Get my rivets. And 4 caps. 1, 2, 3, another one, 4. I'm using Emeline medium on this bag, and right, So on this one I like to poke them through from behind and then add the cap on the top, and that just minimises how much we're moving these handles because they're not fully secure yet until we insert these rivets. And remember, if you want a little bit extra bling, you can add rivets to the handles as well, to the tops of the handles above the rings there, if you would like to, which I might well go back and do because I do love a bit of bling. So just pop this last one in. Now, because these rivets are right in the centre of my panel, my rivet setter, my press, is not going to set these, so I'm going to use my anvil and setter and my hammer. I do describe all of these, go through all of these in my masterclass video, so if you would like to know more about rivets, please do follow that link over to there. I'm going to turn my microphone off again. All I'm going to do is hammer these into place. Right, okay, so I've set all of those rivets, I've double checked them, they're all secure in place, and I'll just keep finding all of those little circles that we've punched out. Might as well pop those away for a minute. Now the next thing we're going to do is exactly the same as we did for the lining, except we're going to do it for our exterior, and we're going to have to try and pretend that the lining is not attached. So exactly the same as we did before. We need our lining bag. So this is what we've made earlier, isn't it? That's our lining all completely attached. And this time we're going to attach our main panel to the exterior top zip, pulling this lining back, ignoring that, pretending it's not even there. So make sure those handles are down. You can pull them as far down as you like, they're nice and secure now. And lining up the centres, although it should match on this long edge. I'm going to clip this into place. So we're going to create our exterior loop this way. Okay, so we're just going to sew along there. Let me double check we're using the regular seam allowance. Yeah. Okay. So, literally exactly the same as we did for the lining. Except I need to change my stitch length back down. Well remembered. Right, so I know it's a little bit tricky, but just ignore that line and pretend it's not even there at all. Okay. Now we are going to pull this back and match this end to the other side of the main panels. So we're creating our exterior loop the same way as we did for the lining, but this time we've just got to ignore the lining that's there. So just pull everything back out of the way, all this zip, everything, pull everything out of the way, and we're just going to sew along there. Right, so now we've got our exterior loop exactly the same as we had for our lining. So we've got this lining attached on the top there. Okay. I think before we get started on this, actually, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll clip this into place and then I'll go off camera to hand baste it, because you don't want to sit watching me hand baste this, I'm sure. So we've got our exterior side panels, and I've added my fleece to those. Now on these ones, I haven't fused them, I've basted them into place, because I know that this fabric and this particular fleece does go a little bit wrinkly when I fuse it, so I've chosen not to. I've chosen to baste it around the edges instead. And I've written my top on from the pattern piece. I do need to mark my centres though, so I'll do that. And I know we all absolutely love hand sewing, but unfortunately this bag is a lot easier to sew these into place if you do hand baste them first. So it's your choice whether you do hand baste or not, but myself, I'm going to, despite the fact that I absolutely hate hand basting. Right, so this is our exterior loop. Now this is the base and this is the lining top, the zip top. So I'm going to match the top of my side panel to the top centre mark of that exterior top, and we are literally just doing, oh I haven't marked my centre there, we are literally just doing exactly the same as we did for the lining, except it's a little bit stiffer because you've got all of that stabiliser in it. Don't panic, it's normal. Okay. Right, so now I'm going to attach the top. I'm just going to clip it into place for the minute. Or I might pin it actually, because I'm not going to be putting this through the machine until I've hand basted it. So the top, and then the centre bottom, match that to the bottom, the centre of the base, and then literally just work my way around, easing it into place. Put a few clips in the seams if you need to, in the seam allowance, and just ease this into place all the way around. Right, so I've pinned that side panel into place to the loop of the exterior. Okay, and I've matched the top to the top, and I've matched the centre part marks. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go and hand baste around that entire edge. Now if you prefer to staple baste you can, it's just still quite difficult to get it exactly right, and then when pushing it through the machine you need to know that that's not going to shift. Quite a lot of bulk here, and it's quite a tight curve, so I would recommend hand basting if you can possibly bear it. If not, staple baste, and we're going to do exactly the same for the other side. So by the time I come back to you, pause me now and do your insert your side panels, baste them. So when I come back to you, this side will be basted and this side will be basted, and we'll be ready to put it through the machine to sew it into place. And then we're nearly done. Very, very nearly done. Right, so now I've basted my end panels into my exterior loop. So we've still got the lining on top. It's attached along that diagonal zip. We're going to try and ignore it. So now we're going to sew these end panels in, and we're using exactly the same seam allowance as we have throughout. And as I said before, if you want to sew with this side panel down, that will give you less puckers, but it is slightly trickier. So if you prefer to sew it with the side panel up, you can do. Just make sure that your basting is is done to keep things even. So I'm going to sew with it right sides down, sorry, the side panel down. I'm going to sew around this entire panel, and then I'm going to sew around the other panel. Regular stitch length, okay. Right, so just have a little check round, check there's no puckers, check everything's nice and flat. What you can do is open up this turning gap and reach through and just double check that there's no puckers from the right side. So I'll do that now. As you're sewing these end panels, you just need to make sure that you are manipulating that fabric into place. Squash it all down, encourage it into place. You show that side panel who's boss, and you'll find it's much easier then. Don't be afraid of it. Right, now we also have our turning gap in the bottom of our side panel as well. So while I've got my seam ripper here, I might as well open that too. Turn it around so you can see a little bit what I'm doing. Right, so I can now reach through this gap because of course we left all of the zips open and we weren't tempted to go back in and open any of them. And I can just run my hand around inside, checking for any puckers, anything that needs unpicking and redoing. I think we're okay. Yep, we're okay from what I can see. So now we can sew the second side exactly the same as we did before. If you need to, you can reach through that gap and just make sure that all your layers are flat. I had my handle in the way there. Seem to have a very cheeky handle, keeps getting in the way. Okay. Right, so now that I've got my handle out of the way, just seem to keep going in between that seam, or where that seam was meant to be. So I'll just run my fingers around and check I haven't got any puckers, same as I did before. Yep, feels okay. Just have a quick peek. Yeah, looks okay. So now I can trim these curves with my pinking shears, same as we did for the lining. Oh dear, keep getting my microphone caught in the drawer. Right, so we're literally just trimming these curves. If you use staples to baste, then this is now the time when you want to remove those. Let me just double check that we do want to trim. Yes, we do. It's a good job one of us has got this written down, isn't it? All right. It does get a bit thick in places, so just trim off what you can. That's one side, so we'll do the second side. This helps it have a nice, neat curve, without any angles. Making sure we're not cutting through our stitches here. Just trimming all 4 corners. So that's 3. Just trim this last one. It's a lot easier on the lining, isn't it, without the stabiliser? Okay. Now we're going to, let's double check what we're going to do. Now we are going to insert our magnetic snaps. So the snaps are going into the exterior. And remember, we cut the holes for those earlier, didn't we? We cut the slits for them. So I'll retrieve my snaps, and my feet are stuck to these as well. Separate those out. Now you should have 2 of each half. So 2 female, 2 male. And we're going to want to make sure that these 2 are not exactly the same. So we don't want, we want to make sure that these 2 are the same, sorry. So your bag is going to snap together like this. So we don't want a female and a female, because female and a male, because otherwise your bag is going to snap together the other way. If you do put a female and a male, it doesn't matter, you just need to mirror them on the other side. Okay, so I'm going to put both female on this side here. Okay, so where you've got the flat piece with the foam, you want exactly the same. So I'm going to reach through my turning gaps with my female snaps and just pop those through the slits that we made earlier. If I can find the slits again. There we go. I think I'm coming at this from the wrong angle. Okay, so pop those prongs through, add a square of foam stabiliser just for extra stability, and then a washer, and then we can bend those prongs. I'm going to use the end of my rotary cutter to bend these in. Right, so I've got a female one here, so I need to make sure I put a female one here as well. And then they will be mirrored on the other edge. So you'll need to move your zip out of the way to get this one in if you have started on the same side as me. Push that through, add the square of stabiliser and a washer, and then bend the prongs. I like to bend them in, and I have heard people say it really doesn't matter, but I did have a bag and the prongs were bent outwards, and over time they slipped out from the holes, from the slits, so I like to do them inwards now. And you can add a little bit of electrical tape on the back just to stop those rubbing through. So appear to have misplaced my electrical tape. If I was watching this, I would rewind and find out where I put it, and then I could retrieve it. But oh, it's in my drawer. It's just facing the other way, so I didn't see it. So I did put it away. So being neat and tidy has paid off on this occasion. So I'm just going to put a little scrap of this over the prongs, and that will stop it rubbing through to the lining. You could do that on the back of all of your hardware. Anything you're inserting that's got sharp bits or things that you think are going to rub. Right, so now we need to do the two on the other side, and we've got the other halves remaining. So pull this bit through so I can see where I'm going. So through that turning gap, I've just got the little slit marks there. So that I can see where I'm pushing. Sometimes a little bit hard getting it through the fleece, isn't it? The little layers of the fleece don't seem to want to let it through. I can see you. Come on. Oh dear. I promise you this is not my first magnetic snap. Although it would appear to be my first magnetic snap. I understand that. Right, there we go. Oh no, it's fallen out. Oh no. Honestly, this is a roller coaster of emotions, this is, isn't it? I wonder if we'll edit this out and put it in bloopers, or if we'll just keep it in. You'll have to hunt for it, spot the falling magnetic snap. Right, I've got it back in again, adding my foam. And washer. As I said earlier in the video, if you've got a narrow foot, you can add these washers at the point where we after we've done the zip. Unfortunately, my foot is just a little bit too chunky, and it kind of goes on the snaps. It doesn't like it. Okay, I can promise these snaps are not going anywhere with how tough that is to bend those in. They're definitely secure. And a dab of electrical tape. Right, one last one in this corner here. So we'll expose that. There's that handle, that cheeky handle, it kept getting in the way. It's had its moment of fame. Right. My prongs are slightly not level. I wonder if my fray check has maybe closed the holes slightly on these. Let's try that. Yes, I think that might be it. So if you haven't done yours yet and you're watching this, just pop the end of your scissors very, very slightly and very, very carefully back through those slits to make sure that the fray check hasn't closed those. Right, that's the last one, so we just need to close the prongs on this one. I think I might put this on the table. There must be an easier way to bend the prongs. I shall have to ask my friend who makes them and find out. because it's not the easiest, is it? Not the easiest of things to do. And you can't hammer them, because otherwise they lose their magnetism. There must be a trick that I'm missing. If you know the answer, please do tell me. Right. Okay, all 4 snaps are in. Let's add a little bit of tape to the back of that one. And then we can move on. Right. Okay, so all of the snaps are in. What we're going to do next is we're going to sew the seam allowances together. So we've got our exterior bag and our lining bag. And to stop the lining bag sagging inside the exterior bag, we need to sew these seam allowances together. So straighten this out or flatten this out as much as you can. And this seam allowance for the top zip panel of the lining is going to get sewn to this seam allowance for the top zip panel of the exterior. And we're going to sew them within the seam allowances, so it won't be shown on the outside of the bag. We're literally just pinching those seam allowances together so that they're attached. So this is the top lining, top zip panel. So I've got my lining sticking up and my exterior sitting down, and we're just sewing those seam allowances together along the edge there. Is my regular stitch length, but just inside the seam allowance. And you don't have to do the whole length of it, just as far as you can without it getting awkward. And then we're going to do the exact same on the other side. So this side of the top zip panel, going to attach to this side of the top zip panel. And that just stops it sagging down once it's all inside and turned through. So now we're going to turn it right sides out through this gap. So give yourself a big deep breath, and actually you might find it easier to turn the lining through and then the exterior, however you need to get this bag through to the right side. Just give it some gentle tugs. Get it through. I know the turning gap is a little bit small on this bag. This is maybe why I prefer big bags. Who knows? Just gently but firmly tug it through. Okay, so I've turned it inside out, and now I'm going to turn it the right way out. So just tug the exterior out. Don't want to rip anything. Just gently. There we go. Now don't panic. We are looking quite creased, but don't panic. We can sort that out with our final press. Right, there we go. Get all of the corners pushed out. Okay. All of those corners nicely pushed out. And then we're going to get our bag base and insert it through the top zip and through the turning gap in the lining. Okay, so retrieve your plastic bag base and pop it through into that gap between the layers. And now again we're going blind, so we're going to pop our feet through those holes that we made earlier. Do you know what? I'm going to learn from what I did last time and just reopen those holes with the end of my scissors very, very carefully, trying not to push them in too far. Yeah, I think they definitely needed that. So push it through the exterior and the Decaville and the foam, and then grab your bag base inside and push it through the hole on the plastic bag base. And I can't see, or I can't feel it's in the right place, so I'll just have a look and peek inside, get it lined up. There we go. Okay, don't know if you can see that. So now I can open out my prongs, and if you want to, you can add a little bit of tape. I think I will. That'll just help secure them in place. If you've got washers, you can add them. I have got washers for these, but I didn't use them because I'm using the plastic bag base, and that's enough to keep them secured in. But if you would like a little bit of extra reassurance, you've got that option there. Okay, I'll just add that and then move on to the next one. So once you've got one in, it should in theory be a little bit easier because the plastic bag base is already sort of in the right place. Yeah, there we go. And now I can open those prongs. Once you've turned this bag through, you know the turning gap is plenty big enough to see inside what you're doing. It's just a little bit tricky maybe to turn it through. Right, although it is a little bit easier on the large one because obviously the large one has got a bigger turning gap. So, and add a bit of tape. Last one. Oh, we're so close to being done. And it looks great so far. A bit creased, a bit wrinkled, but we are all a little bit wrinkled, aren't we? So that's okay. Right, so the feet are in. I've got loose thread there, so I'll clip that. Now to close this turning gap, you need to pull your lining out as much as you can and then put your hand through the turning gap in the zip pocket and pull these lining pieces out, the main lining pieces, if you can. It's once you've got the bag in front of you, it's a little bit easier to visualize. So I've got my top zip open, obviously, my zip pocket. So through the zip pocket, I've pulled the lining panels out and I can sew these closed now. A few clips just to hold it while I was sewing. And you can sew along those original stitch dots that we've got from when we sewed it and steamed it and unpicked it. Oh dear, I've clipped only one side of it, so that's no good, is it? I won't keep it in the right place. Okay. So remember to back stitch at the start and the end, regular stitch length, regular seam allowance. And then this is just going to disguise that there was ever a turning gap there to begin with. Right, so now we can push that back into place, and then the only thing we've got left to close is this turning gap in our zip pocket. So I'm going to poke the corners out so that most of the seam is exposed, and it should naturally fold along that stitch line that we had earlier. These clips are slightly large for the job in hand, but never mind. So I'm going to close mine using the machine, but if you prefer to ladder stitch, you can close that quite nicely by hand. But as previously discussed, I absolutely hate hand stitching. So I've just used a very, very, very scant 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So I've caught both sides of the fabric, but it's very narrow. And we can tuck that zip pocket back in, and then the only thing we've got to do really is a final press. And do your final steam press before you show your friends or family, because it'll just make it look so much more like the finished bag. Something to really be proud of, because when your bag's just been turned through and it's all full of creases, it doesn't actually look as lovely as it should. And it should look lovely because you've put a lot of time and effort into it, and you've taken the time to choose your fabrics, and you've sewn it, and you've sewn it with care and love and skill. So I'm just making sure that all of these edges are nicely pushed down into the right places, so all of the seams are in place, all of the edges all the way around inside of my lining. My pockets are in place. Okay, now I've got a special ironing mitt thing which I can use so I can put my hand inside the bag while we're pressing. If you haven't got one, then you could use something like an oven glove or an oven mitt. Just make sure that if you feel any kind of heat at all, you stop instantly. So I'm able to press against the fabric of the bag with my ironing mitt and my steam iron, and then it irons both the exterior and the lining then as well. Obviously if you feel any heat at all, those stop. I have before used a rolled up towel, and that works okay. Doesn't work quite as well as an oven glove, but this ironing mitt was so cheap. Just bought it online, and it's just called ironing mitt. Just protects your hands a little bit. Okay, now the only bit left to do is the top zip panel, so I'm just going to press against it with my ironing mitt, and then use my, oh hang on, take the plastic off the magnetic snaps before I catch those with my iron. Give that a nice steam press. Overuse, your bag will start to form the natural creases of where it's folding in use, so don't panic too much. That's our bag done, so you can zip it up and do up the clasps and take it for quality control. Whoever does your quality control, mine is done by my husband and my 6-year-old daughter. So although by the time you watch this she'll be 7. So there's our Super Nova Satchel, all completed, ready for showing off, ready to take out for a shopping trip. I hope you've enjoyed making yours, and I'd love to see it. So if you've made yours, please do show me in the Facebook groups, or add it to our Bag of the Month Club competition if you're making it during the season, Bag of the Month Club. Otherwise tag me and we'd love to see it. Thanks for sewing with me.